Hello everyone, Nordic Beast here, and welcome to my review of the Fallout series. Now you might be asking yourself, what do you consider the Fallout series? Well, for me, it's the original Fallout, Fallout 2, Fallout Tactics, Fallout 3, Fallout New Vegas, and Fallout 4, in that order. Now, there was a Fallout Brotherhood, which is often confused with Fallout Tactics, because Tactics is technically called Fallout Tactics Brotherhood. But this other game, Fallout Brotherhood, was so bad, it's not even considered canon. At least Fallout Tactics Brotherhood is considered semi-canon, as well as New Vegas, but we'll get into that later. So before we get started, I want to cover my Fallout credentials. Now, I started playing the original Fallout back in 1998 with my dad. We saw it at the store, it looked amazing, and I eventually convinced him to buy it. I was maybe 14 years old. Now, we played through the whole game, I sat there with him, and it was stunning. There was nothing like it at the time. Later on, I would end up playing Fallout 2. He ended up buying it because of the original Fallout, which equally as amazing. Now, Fallout Tactics I didn't end up playing until much later. Then in 2008, I bought Fallout 3 maybe a week after it came out. I bought Fallout New Vegas the day it came out. In fact, I wasn't even aware of it until about a week before its release. And then, of course, now Fallout 4. First, let's talk about the original Fallout. As I said before, there was nothing like it at the time. I'm sure there were similar games in different genres, but nothing that was in the mainstream. This was the first game I had ever seen that was of an Art Deco dystopian future. Not to mention it had the unique features of 3D models, extremely large randomly generated map. While there were fixed cities, there were random encounters, as well as voiced characters. One was by Ron Perlman. Some of the other features that really stood out, especially for a teenage boy, was the sex and the violence. It was a very gory game. Again, I hadn't seen anything like that ever, and let's not forget the sex. Granted, it was with prostitutes, but it was still sex. Along with that, some of the best features of that game were the NPCs. They made you care about them. They had a great backstory, all of them, as well as the actual story itself. It was riveting. One of the main features of the original Fallouts that, to me, is the most important aspect of all the games, or at least the Fallout universe, is that there is supposed to be no good guys. No matter how good you are, you still have to make tough, difficult decisions that can make you a bad guy. This will come into play much later. Let's talk about the combat. Now, as an adult, I don't enjoy turn-based combat, but as a teenager when I originally played the game, it didn't bother me at all. It did bother me that I couldn't just simply fight my enemies, that I had to wait on turns and things like that. But I had played plenty of turn-based games such as Masters of Orion 2 and the Civilization series. So surprisingly, the combat was my favorite feature of the original Fallout. But as an adult, I don't much care for it. That being said, as far as turn-based combat goes, the original Fallouts had done it correctly. It was a very fair system. The Vats system with the different action points, which would later attribute to the Vats system in Fallout 3, New Vegas, and 4. The enemies. The enemies were tough in the original Fallout. Especially if you ran into a super mutant or a Deathclaw, you had to be very high level or have very powerful weapons, if not both. And sometimes when you're facing multiple ones, even then you would have to run or die. I enjoyed that aspect of the game. They kind of lost focus in the later games, especially with the super mutants, on how strong those enemies were. The super mutants in the original usually carried heavy weapons such as Gatling guns or rocket launchers, but they barely had an understanding of those weapons. They simply could use them. Not to mention these were first generation super mutants. They were dumb, but they weren't as dumb as they are in the later games, especially the 3D one. Okay, let's talk about Fallout 2. Fallout 2 for me was pretty much more the same. And what do I mean by that? Well, there was more guns, more armor, more NPCs, more enemies, bigger map, more everything. And it was a worthy sequel. The only thing I didn't like about Fallout 2 was the beginning of the game. I won't give too much away, but the beginning of the game was a trial. You had to go through pretty much trial by combat. And if you didn't have a melee character, or a stealth-based character, you couldn't get through it, or it was at least very, very difficult. And even being a veteran of the original Fallout, which at that point I had already beaten, I actually had trouble getting through it, and it ruined my first impression of the game. Luckily, I was smart enough to come back and try it again. After that, I was able to beat the intro, and was able to see how amazing of a game it was. Now, the story itself was excellent. In fact, one of the best out of the Fallout series. My problem with it was the story was very linear and was extremely easy to take advantage of. When I was a teenager, I was able to go to a city, and if I got into a random encounter on the way that would kill me, I could just save and reload before that would happen, and just keep trying until I reached that city. Was able to take a mission, and once you beat the mission, which even if you had no combat skills, it was beatable, you would be able to get the best armor in the game, a bunch of amazing weapons, as well as level about 10 levels instantly. So it was a bit of an exploit, actually it was a major exploit, that was too easy and too tempting for a teenager to take advantage of. Nowadays I wouldn't, but it was a bit of a flaw with the game. It was an open world, but it was still linear. You could take side missions in the towns you were in, but it was pretty straightforward what towns you should have gone to. Other than that, the story was excellent, it was riveting, it kept you interested the entire time, it was never boring, and was the first introduction of the Enclave. So now is a good time to talk about the original creators of Fallout. For the original Fallout, the studio was called Interplay. For Fallout 2, it was Black Isle. And for Fallout New Vegas, who was also the original creators, was Obsidian. As you'll notice with these three titles, if you've played them, all of these follow my golden rule. There are no good guys in Fallout. In the later Fallouts, like I said, this changed, because Fallout Tactics was made by a company called, I believe it was 38 Degrees East? Something along those lines. I've never even heard of them. And then Fallout 3 and 4 is created by Bethesda, which is a good company, but my biggest issue with their games was the fact they tried to make good guys. And in fact, in Fallout Tactics, they also tried to make good guys. So with that being said, naturally, let's move on to Fallout Tactics. So surprisingly, I haven't played much of Fallout Tactics. I do own it, and I have played it in recent years, but not very much. I did play it as a teenager. My friend Grish, who I've mentioned in my videos before, he had told me about it, and he mentioned that basically it was the Fallout combat system, but with almost no story. So to me at the time, as a teenager, that sounded very appealing, because I enjoyed the combat system. But the biggest feature about all the Fallouts were the story. The story is interesting and dark and compelling. You take that away, you just have turn-based combat and a dark dystopian Art Deco setting. So much like Fallout 2, Fallout Tactics was more the same, minus story. There's more weapons, more armor. This time, instead of just one character, you could play, I believe, up to 6. It was a squad-based game. And they also had a quasi-real-time aspect about it, so it wasn't just turn-based. I didn't much care for it, but I am definitely willing to give it another try in the future, because I have been surprised by games before. Skipping forward a couple of years, to 2008, was the release of Fallout 3. Now, much like the original Fallout, there was nothing like Fallout 3. This was the introduction of full 3D graphics, an open world for exploration, as well as a very interesting use of Vats, which of course would pause the game and gave non-first person players the ability to play a first-person game, especially if you were more interested in the story and not, well, say, the combat. But of course, it had an excellent combat system if you were interested in the combat itself. Now, me personally, I didn't much care for the story of Fallout 3, mostly because they tried to make good guys. There shouldn't be good guys, and especially, beware, there's a spoiler here, especially the Brotherhood of Steel. The Brotherhood of Steel in the original Fallouts were obsessed with just technology. That's all they cared about. They don't care about people. In Fallout Tactics, they ended up changing this. In Fallout Tactics, the main protagonist is part of the Brotherhood of Steel because the Brotherhood of Steel had broken away from the main faction and basically became the local superheroes. They tried to do this in Fallout 3 as well, and I didn't like it. I didn't like them being this clear-cut good guys. That being said, I didn't much care for the main protagonist's motivation being family. I didn't care about the family, even if they were voiced by Liam Neeson. The NPCs, on the other hand, were excellent. I found myself caring about them, very interesting. They stood out, and they were memorable, even to this day. I haven't actually played Fallout 3 in about 3 years, mostly because of Fallout New Vegas. But I still remember characters, such as the Craterside Supply, the lady that was in there. She definitely stood out in that game. Fox is another good one. Fox is a super mutant you meet later on in the game. Very interesting characters. Again, they stand out, and that's important in a Fallout game. But overall, I was just disappointed by the overall good feeling in the game. Again, no good guys. Now, to go back to the graphics for a moment, a few people didn't like the green tint to the game, which I can understand, but it definitely set a mood to the game itself. It gave a darker feeling to it. But you don't necessarily need to do that with lighting, or at least with a tint filter. You could do that with actual lighting. Also, the graphics at the time were simply amazing. To this day, I still feel Fallout 3, as well as New Vegas, which I believe is just an enhanced version of that engine, are stunning. Absolutely stunning. Especially the ground clutter. That's what got me when I first played the original Fallout 3. Was you look down at the ground and there's paper and debris everywhere. Not to mention the metro system. There was nothing like taking a shotgun into the metro and hunting ghouls. Moving on to Fallout New Vegas. Easily my favorite Fallout out of the entire series, even after playing Fallout 4. I have over 800 hours in New Vegas. The only game that beats that is Space Engineers, and the only other game to come close to it was another Bethesda game, Skyrim. So what makes it so great? Well, first off, the story was stunning. Easily my favorite out of all the other Fallout games. Why? Well, first off, there are no good guys, including the Brotherhood. The Brotherhood, well, are the Brotherhood. The weapons were expanded on pretty heavily. In fact, you could add new parts to your guns. There were more armor, but the armor really wasn't expanded on too much, not in the features. Not to mention there was a hardcore survival mode, though the released version was actually a lot easier than the real version, which you could later download a very small mod for it called the J. Sawyer mod, which made the game horrendously difficult, and I absolutely enjoyed it. By the time I had downloaded the J. Sawyer mod, I had already been playing the game for about 3 years, and I died almost immediately after leaving the first town the first time I had used the J. Sawyer mod. The NPCs. Very memorable and interesting, makes you compassionate and care about them. Even the protagonist's story was interesting. It was very simple, and it allowed you to just go out and do what you wanted. You weren't pressured to do so. So, what's bad about New Vegas? Well, it's pretty bad. You're in a fucking desert. No matter how you try to spice it up, no matter what you put out there, no matter how interesting you try to make it, you're still in a fucking desert. I hated that. Absolutely hated that. Not to mention, the first third of the story is very linear. In order to get to New Vegas, you had to make this giant U shape that could take you hours if you were to do missions along the way. If you were simply just to try to run to New Vegas in this U shape that you had to go in relative safety, would probably take you 20 minutes to half an hour just to go that distance. Not to mention to actually do any missions that would level you and get you experience. There was a way where you could head directly to New Vegas, but they put Super Mutants and Deathclaws in between. Now, in New Vegas, Super Mutants and Deathclaws were horrendously difficult to fight, especially early on. The Super Mutants kind of dropped off mid-game and didn't become as difficult, but the Deathclaws were more difficult in that game than I think all the other games combined. They were so tough. In fact, there is a secret area in the game referred to as, I believe, the Deathclaw Nest. It's unmarked. I was only able to clear it out once with a very high level character sniping while using stealth boys. Very tough, which is also what I enjoyed about that game, is how difficult it was compared to the others. Now on to the big one, Fallout 4. So for Fallout 4, I was more excited for that game than probably all the other Fallouts combined, including New Vegas, which I had only found out a week before its release and was quite excited for. Fallout 4 had just been so anticipated, I could not believe when the actual trailer had come out. It was one of those things that you heard about so often you thought, it's never gonna happen, and then lo and behold, it happened. Now, Fallout 4 was a bit of a mixed bag for me when I first started playing it. I won't give any spoilers away for the storyline, but I will say at first, it seemed as though it was only good guys and bad guys, much like Fallout 3. But as I played the game more and more, I realized there were shades of gray to it. It didn't completely improve the game, but it certainly made me appreciate it more, and I'm not nearly as skeptical about it now. So what do I like? Well, I definitely enjoy the gun customization, but that also has its issues. I enjoy it, I like being able to customize and build my own weapons, but the problem with it is I end up spending a lot of time doing that, and say there's a piece of a weapon that I want to add on to it, but I don't quite have the perks yet. If I want a pipe rifle instead of a pipe pistol, but I don't have the proper perk in order to make it a rifle as opposed to a pistol, then I'm stuck with a pistol this entire time. Well, that can get extremely irritating, especially with some of the later weapons, that you can't even make them into a rifle until you get to a certain level. But you can still buy the weapon, you just can't have the weapon as a rifle, unless you're lucky enough to find it that way. That was very frustrating. Same thing could be said about the armor. I like that it's so customizable, but it is now in 6 pieces as well as a piece of clothing you wear underneath. You have to customize each individual piece. I honestly enjoyed the simplicity of just having one hunk of armor. Or at the very least, they should have given you the option of being able to have one piece of armor that's an entire set, as opposed to dealing with each individual piece. I understand that may have been difficult to balance, but I think it would have been a nice option for it. The same can be said about the house building system. I really like that. I like being able to build my own house, but there's also a settlement building system. To be honest, I don't care about building a settlement. They try to make it part of the game. It's not mandatory, but it almost might as well be, and I find it very frustrating. I don't want to care about a town. I would rather just care about myself and my house, and perhaps my followers, if I have any. So, in that manner, it's the same as with the weapons and with the armor. It's good, but it's also bad. They've also added a voiced protagonist. This is both good and bad. The voice acting, excellent, as well as the lines themselves. But it gives me trouble to immerse myself in the role-playing by hearing somebody else's voice. I would rather not hear a voice. I've never really heard anybody complain about their being no voice to the main character, or having to read what they had said. They've also changed the dialogue options. You now only have 4 options, which I'm pretty sure that was implemented because of consoles, making it a little bit easier. But they've also summed up the dialogue. They don't give you the exact dialogue. So, for the voiced protagonist and for the dialogue, those were some of the first mods they came out with to remove the voice and to show you the full dialogue options instead of the summed up version. Now, another thing that they've changed in Fallout 4 that I don't much care for but I don't really use is Vats. Now, Vats in the previous games I simply used to identify a target. I didn't build a character to use Vats, but in Fallout 3 and New Vegas you could. That was an option, and it was good for players who didn't really play first-person shooters, or people that weren't used to using consoles since they were console releases. In Fallout 4, they have changed it so that in Vats it goes to slow motion as opposed to pausing the game. Well, the AI is also far better in this game, so that is a good aspect of it, but they dodge for cover constantly. And with that, you go into Vats, you try to target somebody. If you don't target them quick enough, or if you have trouble trying to click on the proper body part, which can be an issue, they'll hide in cover, and then you lose your choice to use Vats. And your Vats either completely goes away because you have no chance of hitting them, or you have such a minuscule chance of hitting them around cover that it's useless to use it and you might as well just run around and shoot them. This isn't exactly fair to the players who are either casual or, again, don't play first-person shooters. So overall, Fallout 4, I haven't beaten it yet, but I enjoy it. I do like it. When I first started playing it, I thought it would have been a great game had they not called it Fallout 4. As I've gone through the story more and more, I definitely consider it part of the series, but overall, except for Fallout Tactics, I would consider it my least favorite, but I do enjoy the game. That being said, I have an idea of a series that I would like to do recording Fallout 4, and that would be without the protagonist voice and with the full dialogue options, allowing me to actually speak and roleplay the character as I play. If anyone is interested in that, please let me know in the comments down below. Also, if you guys enjoyed this episode, let me know. If you'd like me to do more reviews in the future on different games, I'm open to doing so. Let me know how you feel about it. But if you enjoyed this episode, please hit that like button, and I will see you guys next time.